Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Emily Harburg. Emily is the co-founder and CEO of PairUp, a B2B SaaS platform that boosts workplace knowledge sharing, increases connectivity, and helps you solve problems more efficiently at work. Emily's background spans industry, startups, and academia. She has worked at Walt Disney Imagineering, where she designed technology for the Disney theme parks, at Meta, where she worked as a UX researcher, and at EF Education First, where she led the emerging tech and innovation team, designing tech to support millions of students around the world. In 2015, Emily co-founded Brave Initiatives, an organization dedicated to helping women build tech skills and confidence in coding for social impact. Emily's academic research lies at the intersection of technology and social behavior, and the role that technology can play in building self-efficacy and confidence. Her research has been published and shared in global conferences, academic journals, case studies, and news publications, including the Harvard Business Review, TEDx, CNN, and more. Emily graduated with a BA in Social Anthropology and Psychology from Harvard College and with a Ph.D in Technology and Social Behavior from Northwestern University. So incredibly impressive. But Emily, it's so great to have you on the show. Welcome to She Leads.
Thank you so much for having me and for doing this show.
Of course, of course. And it's perfect. We're recording on International Women's Day. So here's to that. I love that.
Perfect timing.
So, Emily, I want to know, tell me a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up and what type of kid were you?
Yeah. So I grew up into a moving family. We moved about every 2 years or 2.5 years growing up. My parents were both originally in the military. So my dad was Air Force and my mom was Army. And so we were kind of living, initially they were moving for military and then we're moving more for work. And we were all over the US and all over Europe. So I was constantly like the new kid with my brothers. We were always trying to kind of fit in and just kind of moving around and being in different types of cultures. So I think in some ways, I think it was why I was interested in psychology and anthropology for when I ended up going to college, because I was just always interested in people and, how do you feel a sense of belonging with people and how do you kind of better understand cultures so that then you can kind of better understand who those people are and how to meet them and how to get to know them. So was always a people watcher, I would say, as a kid.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny because I think there are many aspects of that type of childhood that sound very cool, right? Traveling the world, seeing new places, but at the same time, on the other, flip a coin, it's very hard and unsettling and always being the new kid, like you said. Did you find, was it hard socially, like to actually make friends and create a community around you?
Yeah, I would say sports saved me because sports really helped me find teams in these different cities. So usually, like, I would join a team when I got there, and then that would really help me meet other women or meet other kids within the school. So sports were super helpful, as well as just different clubs. So I would always try and be in like every club that I could, just so that I could meet people and get to know others and feel a sense of community and kind of connection with the interests that I had. And also my brothers and I were very close. So I think we had this kind of home base that as we moved, we were like, had this kind of tight unit, which I think helped us and also with my parents and their support around us. So it was a little bit of combination of building resilience to be like, it's okay to not fit in. And in some ways there was an element when I was growing up where you're like, with each move, you could keep recreating yourself in a way or thinking, what are the things that I like and the things that I want to shift in this next move. So it was an interesting kind of experiment.
You can almost like reinvent yourself a little bit each time because, they don't know who you were before. Exactly. That's very cool. And knowing where you are now as a founder, and obviously we'll get into that, are there pieces that you can now reflect on your childhood that gave you hints of that entrepreneurial spirit, if you will?
Yeah, definitely. So I think as a kid, I always had this bone in me, I think probably from my parents too, and watching them, they both had entrepreneurial instincts in them as well. But there were a bunch of, like I started a babysitter's company with two friends and we were living in Switzerland where we were going out and, putting out flyers and trying to get families and going and giving them at local community centers. And so yeah, there were instincts in me that were watching that. I was also a Girl Scout and got to kind of learn a lot about strength and confidence and thinking about using my voice as a kid. And yeah, so definitely, kind of patterns. I was always wanting to try and create new clubs or new programs and organizations, both in high school and also in undergrad. So it was fun to, you kind of see patterns. Sometimes, I don't know if as a kid I would have said, I want to run my own business someday. But now looking back, I see that I was always wanting to create. So
Yeah.
you see that pattern a little bit more later.
And I'm sure that the value of traveling too and just being kind of put in a new community, in a new culture, you also have to almost build that empathetic muscle in a way and like
Yeah.
being able to talk to people from different backgrounds. And that probably lends itself so well to being a founder and talking to your users and stepping in their shoes and everything. So I'm sure there are so many transferable skills, but that's incredible.
Yeah,
And
the anthropological mindset I think is so good. Yeah, even
totally.
for building businesses too. Yeah.
So walk me through. You ultimately go to Harvard, as I said in the intro, and you studied anthropology and psychology. How were you
Mhm.
thinking career wise post Harvard? And were you talking to others around you of how you should be thinking through it?
Yeah, so I was really struggled with picking a major in college. There were just so many different ones that I wanted to be part. I was always kind of found myself in the lines, like more interdisciplinary than one thing. And actually, with some students and I in undergrad, tried to petition Harvard to create a department in social entrepreneurship, because we thought that there should be a major that really kind of blended those, which we got approval to do almost, but in a lot of these larger institutions, it's too pre-professional, kind of in a liberal arts degree. So we didn't fully pass through with that, but it did help to kind of spur some innovation within classes and the way that classes are taught. But I was wrestling, and I thought maybe that I'd go into journalism, because I was really interested in people and kind of storytelling, and ended up finding that anthropology was this really cool kind of almost an interview based approach to understanding cultures and communities. So I ended up ultimately settling on anthro, but my parents were like, what are you going to do with it? I mean, I think they were supportive because they also are interested in psychology, but they're like, what are you going to do with an anthro and psych degree?
Right.
And yeah, thinking about job pathways was a little harder in college at that time.
And I think the thing is, I think it's actually still like that today, where people,
Yeah,
college students, one, they struggle to decide, okay, is this the path I want to go down? And they're always wrestling with should I go for passion and where I'm gravitated towards versus this is going to set me up for, a career down the line. And obviously
totally.
differs depending on the college, but how did you balance that? Because it seems like you navigated more towards that passion and where like what classes gave you energy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I tried to. I mean, it helped that my parents were totally in support of like study what interests you. I think I also think in colleges I wanted to take computer science, but I was worried I wouldn't get a good grade or I wasn't technical enough. So sometimes also it can stop you from taking classes that you might actually be good at, but you're not sure if you would be. So that was one of my reflections after college, was like I definitely was taking classes I was really interested in, but not as much classes that I was like interested, but didn't know if I could do well. So yeah, that was one of my reflections, especially later on, deciding to go study
Yeah.
computer science.
Yeah, you ultimately get a PhD, which is way more intense than a class. So we'll talk about that. But I think you also bring up a really interesting pattern that's happening
Mm,
with the difference of women and men when they're taking
mm,
classes and that confidence that is necessary. Women tend to have a higher bar for saying
yeah,
like, okay, I'm going to take a computer science class. I know I was the exact same as you, and I didn't pursue that track because of it. So
yeah,
we'll talk about that.
yeah.
But ultimately, you decide to go work at Disney.
Hmm.
And as I said, you help design technology for their theme parks. This
Yeah.
sounds so fascinating to me. Tell me a little bit about that role and what gravitated you towards it.
Yeah, well, I like this story because I often feel like, especially as women, and but I think across the board, sometimes we don't apply for jobs that we think we're not fully qualified for. And I remember seeing this ad that Disney was coming to interview on campus, and I didn't fully read the fine print that they were looking for particularly grad students, kind of, and I hadn't done full research initially until I was preparing for the interview of what all that the Imagining Team research. But as I was preparing for the interview, I was starting to realize like, I'm not a grad student. And also I haven't, it's all of these kind of like AI folks and VR people, it was a lot of researchers in more of a lot of the research within the Disney Imagineering research team is really technical centered. And so I'm like trying to prepare for this interview and thinking like, how can I spin the anthropology maybe can support technology, and was kind of thinking about it and ended up going in and had this amazing interview with the woman who was essentially like became my boss years, both that year and then in the years ahead, and was kind of like, we have a perfect project for you that needs anthropologists coming in with more technical people. And so it opened the door to my understanding that actually we need more behavioral folks thinking and building technology, and we really need kind of that human-centered approach in alignment with people that are just interested in the technical side as well. And so, so it opened this sort of this amazing job. Like I used to joke, I was like, I think I've peaked in my first job out of college. Like, I don't know if, I'd find another job where I'm like roaming the theme parks, doing experiments and trying out different things with staff. And, the actual just company of Imagining are just such a creative, wonderful place where you go in and you can like decorate your desks into these amazing spaces, and the projects are so creative, and there's just so many really kind of bright, thoughtful minds there building. So it opened my eyes to both the whole world of kind of where those two, the psychology and computer science, come together, but also my role and desire to actually build skills in computer science as well.
I love that story, mainly because, like you said, where there are so many parts of that application that probably didn't make you a good fit, frankly,
Nope.
right? Even from a experience perspective. And so for you to even just have that confidence and that ability to say, you know what, the call's scheduled, I'm still going to take it. Cause like there are options to be like, actually I'm undergrad and actually I'm probably not a good fit. And they almost, it seemed like, and correct me if I'm wrong, they almost made the role for you, or at least like they were thinking about it and they said, you know what, maybe not this role, but she'll fit perfectly into this role.
Yes.
So it just shows the value of like still advocating for yourself and having that conversation, having that interview. And I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah. It's always worth a shot. And it was one of those where I couldn't have known even from the job description what awaited. So it's like, you got to apply anyway.
And then in that initial stage, because also first job out of college, so there's, it's not easy per se. There's a new environment, new team. You kind of have to prove yourself. Yeah. Did you experience that where you almost had that imposter syndrome, which, comes up a lot?
Yeah, I had in moments. I mean, it was this amazing team. I had a wonderful boss and just this like amazing team around me, which is really rare. I think, there were definitely, I definitely felt intimidated at times. And there were a lot of groups where you go in and kind of shrink a little bit in what you thought the value you could bring to the room. But I think there were a number of amazing managers and supporters around. I mean, a couple of them who were very much like encouraging me to, use my voice and present on things and share what I was finding. And just this really collaborative community, which was really helpful for me. And also a couple female leaders across the organization that were very elevating to me, which was amazing. It was a really gift of a first step right out of undergrad, to start to find my voice, to learn and to kind of shadow and watch people. But I did hit a point where, especially in the research team, I remember when my boss at the time pulled me in and was like, you're going to hit a glass ceiling without having your PhD in this type of environment, because it was a research group. And so it was one of those points where I was like, she was like, I think you can do it. I think you should try.
So that ultimately planted that seed for you to be like, you know what, I want to gain this technical experience. So walk me through that. Why go pursue a whole PhD program? Were you thinking maybe I'll come back to Disney, or what was going through your mind at that point?
Yeah, I was I always loved research and thought maybe I'll be a professor, or maybe I'll go this route of being a research lead within larger corporations. one of my brothers had gone the PhD route and had really started to use it more and thinking about industry and the role that it could have. So I think for me, it seemed like this amazing opportunity to dive really deeply and build expertise in a topic, and really like study it deeply and intricately. And so yeah, I think it was a combination of like, this could open some doors for the researcher that I want to be, and the thinker and thought leader that I'd like to, kind of step into more of. And then also in that specific role being like, I really can't move up without this. And so that's a step that I want to take. But the irony was, I remember out of undergrad, I was like, I'll never go to school ever again. I'm done. I'm not a school
Yeah.
person. So somehow I still ended up back. But
Amazing.
yeah, it was kind of the doors that it could open and the chance to
Yeah.
like really grow deeply in one area.
And reflecting now back on that PhD experience and the
Yeah.
skills and perhaps confidence that you got from it, I'd love to know about that piece. Do you feel that it actually gave you that confidence coming out of it and now into tech and now as a founder, now, part of the tech ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, part of the irony with research is like almost the more you know, the more you know what you don't know. Like in some ways, I felt like you'd see people who, when I knew less, I was like, I know so much. And then the more that I studied something, I was like, there's so much that we don't know. And so in some ways, it almost built a little bit more, kind of an awareness of my limitations or our limitations in research, et cetera. So I think that was interesting, that it kind of, in some ways, I had to like reclaim my voice post grad school, being like, no, you've built a lot of expertise, like you need to own this. But I do think it gave me a platform, like the ability to actually, really both build up my skills on the technical side, which I didn't really have a deep understanding of coming out of undergrad, but then also the ability to say, like, I'm going to pick this thing and really study it, and then get to share that knowledge with others, which was something that you don't have to have a PhD for. You can just know something deeply in many capacities. But for me, it gave me a chance to really, really look deeply at it, and then have a
Wow.
voice in that space.
Yeah, it almost developed that muscle
Yeah.
to go deeply into it. That's great. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yes.
And I know there was a point in your career
Hmm.
around this time where you had a return offer to Meta, to
Yeah.
Facebook, and
Yes.
you ultimately decided to forgo that offer and found a nonprofit, as I mentioned, Brave Initiative. So walk me through
Yeah.
that time and what
Okay.
made you decide I'm going full into this nonprofit.
Yeah, so I had done an internship during grad school where I'd gone to Meta, and I loved it. I just found it was like a fascinating culture, and had an awesome boss there too. Like, fortunately there was aided by some really wonderful mentors kind of along these different steps. But I did an internship, thought it was amazing and fascinating, but my heart had kind of started to wrap around like thinking about how do we get more women like myself when I was younger, who didn't think that I could ever be in computer science or leading in tech, to kind of change that story earlier on. And so there were two other women one who I was doing grad school with, and another who I met through local church community, where we were basically like, is there a way where we can do something with the research that we're finding about how to get women to stay and persist in computer science? So we started to work on this project with high schoolers and local schools around Chicago, and I just loved it. It was one of those things where you go in and like your heart would kind of melt, like just being in that community and that presence. And so I was doing that kind of on, bits throughout my time during when I was doing grad school. And then I hit this point where it was like, do I go this safer route and go back to Meta and work there full time and kind of tinker at this on the side? Or do I give it a shot and see if I can really build this out with a team and take, like an extremely minimal salary versus a very safe, comfortable salary at Meta? And it felt like, if not now, when? And like, I've got the energy and the time and the passion, and I've got to use it. Like hopefully, I imagine Meta will always be there, or not necessarily that job, but there are jobs that will be
Yeah.
possible. But this felt like it was uniquely a use of my skill sets and interests, and personal experiences and passions. So it's like,
Yeah.
we gotta
That's
give it a try.
amazing. And
Yeah.
there are so many, this actually comes up in so many episodes where
Mm.
I had the former CEO of Girl Scouts on the pod, Sylvia Acevedo. She was incredible, probably one of the top episodes. And one thing
Mm.
she mentioned is very much what ultimately inspired you to start Brave Initiatives, which is
Yeah.
that discrepancy amongst
Yeah.
boys and girls. And she was
Mhm.
saying how it gets rooted at such an early age, even when boys are playing with Legos and girls
Yeah.
are kind of pushed away from that circle to go play
Yeah.
with Barbies, or so I think there's such a deep problem that we're trying to solve in a way,
Yeah.
but it's such an important one.
Yeah.
And the other piece that I love is really what you said, where you had this passion, this energy, and you couldn't really put it away.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know, I think a lot of people have that same experience
Mm.
of taking that secure route. And sometimes you need that security. So it makes sense. But how would you almost advise those people who can't afford to go that passion route, but it's scary. It's incredibly
Yeah.
scary because it's risky. And again, nonprofits adds a whole nother layer of complexities, I'm sure. So how would you think about that now for others?
Yeah, no, I think, and there's so many ways you can approach it. There are certainly, I mean, I remember actually even at Meta, there were some of my colleagues who were doing these awesome kind of side passion projects that were things that gave them a ton of energy in life, but they were, just something they did on nights and weekends and kind of on the side as a passion. So I think that there's routes where you can take with that, or even just volunteering in an area where you feel passionate about on the side, especially if it's a season where you can't take as much of a risk, or you need to ensure that you're, make, especially if it, like at the time it was just me who I need to account for. So I'm like, I can live very frugally. I've lived frugally in grad school for 5 years. I can do this for a couple more. But that's obviously harder in different seasons. So I think there are ways to kind of navigate in the side. But I did feel this sense where I felt like if I hadn't, if I hadn't jumped in and tried it, I think I would have really regretted it. And there was a feeling of like listening to that instinct in me of like, try, and you don't know where this will go. And again, in a season when I really felt like I could.
Yeah.
So I think yeah, but I was chatting with someone the other day around sometimes there are like many ways of fulfilling your purpose and your passion, and it may manifest, like even for me, sometimes that's manifested in a big company or a nonprofit or a startup or a governmental group. There are ways that still I feel aligned in my mission, but it manifests in different ways.
Yeah. And from your research
Yeah.
as well as the nonprofit that you did,
Yeah.
what's your biggest takeaway, do you think, that we're almost not doing enough of, or not doing well, that we need to implement in our lives to improve our confidence?
Yeah, I think, there's so many different pieces. But I think one is just the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. Like I think that there's so much of this kind of the story we're reverberating in our minds of we can't do this, or that we shouldn't try for that, or maybe we'd make a mistake on that. And so just like how do we quiet that inner critic and inner noise? Because I found usually other people aren't thinking that. It's just in your own mind and in your own head. And so how do you kind of quiet those voices a little bit? So I think that the inner story, and my dad would always say, the story you tell yourself about yourself, but how do
Yeah.
you kind of tell the right story? And I think the other piece that we've looked a lot at is, how do you really tie it to what it kind of most deeply makes you come alive. And I think for me, even like when I initially started learning to code, if it was around something that I didn't care about, I wasn't that motivated. But when it was around something that I wanted to see in this world, I was like, I will do whatever it takes to figure out how to solve this. And so I think there are elements where the more that you can really kind of align that to the stuff that gets you so excited, the more likely you're going to like stick with it and remain
Yeah.
persistent and figure out a way to make it happen.
And when you think about your personal journey and who
Yeah.
you are, is there a specific moment in time where you needed those affirmations even more? And if so, like
Mm.
how did you come out of it?
Yeah, I think potentially, honestly, it was a couple years ago when I was like trying to decide if I was going to start PairUp or not. I
Yeah.
think there was a season where, I definitely had my, when I was in high school or, college and times when I was like, I wish I could have told my younger self, like, just try that class anyway. It's okay if you don't get a great grade. Like, grades relatively don't matter that much, even for getting into grad school, like just take the class or try the thing. But I do feel like in taking the step into starting and like going through the fundraising journey and trying to build a startup, that was one where I kind of I had to like change that story, because there was a season where it was like, I don't think I'm meant for this. I don't think this is something that I can do. And then I had to really kind of reset myself in that season.
Yeah.
So probably like not that long ago, a couple of years ago, it's
Yeah.
probably, yeah.
I mean, and that makes sense to me. That was probably like when I think of founders and founder stories, that's the natural, that's the natural time in your life. So, perfect segue. Tell me about PairUp and
Yeah.
ultimately the founding story. What gave you that almost seedling to say, okay, this is what I have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, so I had been studying in grad school, like we were looking at remote teams. I was doing a lot of research around tools to help build workplace connection and help staff who are new. Ironically, pulling back to my new days as a kid, I started to study like, how do you help use technology to support newcomers? And we looked at mentorship, like tools to help promote mentorship and ways to help facilitate people getting feedback and social support, et cetera, on their work. So I've been doing a lot of research around remote settings for my PhD, all pre-COVID, and was also doing a lot of work around how do we get more women into tech teams and tech companies. And so had been working on and thinking a lot about that. And COVID hit, and it was this kind of moment that you get, as especially in the research, or as a researcher, or even just when you're running a business, when you're like, this is kind of our moment. This is a lot of the research that we had been studying, especially with distributed teams, which was always somewhat relevant, but like all of a sudden became, every company was trying to figure out how do you support remote staff and distributed teams. And so I just started talking to people about the research we had found, because a lot of people reached out and were like, you study this, what are the things that you suggest? And just started to build this confidence of like, I studied for this moment, how could I use this research to actually put something out there in the world, based on the findings we had. And so I started to tinker a little bit with what this idea could be. I started to, go to some fun, like kind of founder events to try and just see if I could get inspiration from the community and also from the undergrad community, and hit a point where I was like, I'm just going to try and do a pitch competition and see if I can get some traction. I ended up doing that and winning this little pit. It wasn't a pickup pit, but it was enough where it like gave me
Still,
the
yeah.
sense of like, some investors came up and wanted to talk and wanted to learn more. And I just, so I started to get a little confidence on that front, and also started to pitch it to companies and just was like, is this something that you'd buy? Could we try out a little version of this? And so tinkered for a bit. And finally I hit a point where I was like, either jump in fully or don't do this. And so decided to jump in fully, quit my job, and decided to see if I could really bring this to life. And so it forced me into then really having to make it a reality, and really having to fundraise and build a team and start to find real customers who would fully pay for it. So yeah, that was a little
Yeah.
bit of it. Much more in there, but that was a little bit about that journey.
No, that's great. And it seems like what you did as well is try validate it to some extent. You got some interest, you got that pulse of like, you know what, something may be here. Like there is actually some value and delight, if you will. So I think
Yeah.
that's so valuable in those stories, in those journeys.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you mentioned fundraising, you mentioned hiring a team.
Yeah.
Walk me through, what were those moments that you were like, you know what, should I do this? Can I do this? Like, what was that point in time? Take me back to like that Emily. And obviously,
Yeah.
yeah.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, that Emily was pretty good. Like, there was definitely a lot of hesitancy,
Yeah.
filled with a lot of excitement. Like, I think it was this combination where I was like, I knew I had to do it. Like, it was so clear. I'd been for years writing about this, and even after grad school, and I was doing other jobs, I was always trying to test out PairUp, version it with Brave students, or trying to test it out with the communities that I was serving in different capacities. And so I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And so it was so like that kept pushing me forward. Because anytime those questions of doubt of like, maybe you're not, this isn't something you should do, or you're not someone that funders would want to invest in, like those stories come into your mind, and you're like, I think that the passion, this like, I really can't not do this, I think
Yeah.
helped kind of push you forward. But yeah, it was definitely, I mean, I think that I had to just kind of keep trying. I mean, I mean, not just for women, like fundraising is a brutal game. That building a startup for everyone is hard. It certainly doesn't help that the numbers are like 2% of women get funded by VCs and some of the crazy numbers. But it was a game of like, persistence and just not taking, I mean, you can take no for answers, but not giving up in that journey
Yeah.
of it.
And do you see a moment where there was almost this mentality shift for you where it's like rejection, 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 but it's okay, I'm going to keep going? Or was it kind of maintained throughout the entire journey where you're like, you know what, I can't not do it. So we're just going to take it.
Yeah, there was actually one moment where I was like, this is going to happen, where I actually went I'm part of this running group, and we had a morning run that was this like brutal run through the mountains. I'm living in San Francisco right now, and it was like in the hills, the headlands, and I fell like as we were coming down the mountain. I tripped and like completely was just like bandaged and I had a big pitch competition that day. And so I'm like, okay, like we've got, first I was like, maybe I can't do it. I'm like, nope, we're going to do it. Like the doctor had I actually didn't even have health insurance at the time, which was terrible. So the doctor, they wanted to take me in the ER, and I was like, no, don't take me, because I'm like, can't like afford to
It's
pay for that.
expensive. Yeah, totally.
Go, the show must go on. So the like ER person just helped to kind of like bandage me up a little bit. And I went back and like showered, and somehow in this pitch competition, I don't know if the like investors just like felt badly for me or something, but they like that day I got $1 million from those pitches, like from this competition that I got, because there were a couple investors that came in, and it was one of those where I was just like, in some ways I realized that if my mind was almost a little bit distracted because I was not feeling great, and I then wasn't as nervous. I wasn't as like worried or thinking about I was just going, like I just knew my stuff, and I like went in and pitched and just kept my hands below on Zoom so they didn't see the bandages fully, and just went for it. And I think it was one of those days where I was like, you are trained for this. Like you are made for this. You have to just like not overthink it and go. And yeah, it was a very powerful like learning for me that day. And also I kept kind of saying in my like that run, I remember and thinking like I just kept saying like, I have more in my tank was like this mantra that I kept having, like there's more in your tank, like you're not done with this, like you're going to keep going. So I think for me, certain moments like that have helped me be like, you've got this. You got to just keep going.
Emily, that's an amazing story. I love that story. And I think you're right. And it applies to so many different worlds, different industries, different stories. I think the tricky part then is almost how do you replicate it
Yeah.
without, falling and having all these stories. But
Yeah.
it's true. It's almost when you're busy or when something happens and you're forced not to think about something before
Yeah.
you go do a presentation, whatever it may
Yeah.
be, it often goes smoother. So
Yeah.
it's just like quieting your mind and
Yeah.
taming it and like finding that sense of peace. So that's amazing though. That's a great story.
Yeah.
And I love the aspect too of saying the mantra that
Yeah.
you said,
Mhm.
which is great.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And when you think of PairUp today,
Yeah.
what has been, or almost have you had a founder circle around you to lean on? Like what have you almost leaned on externally to almost maintain that mental health, if you will?
Yeah. Yeah. It's been so helpful to have founder communities. I mean, everyone's for the most part been virtual, which is harder at times because but I'm part of a couple cohorts. I was in the Harvard has this iLab group, and they had an incubator that we were part of for the first year, which was amazing to just have that community. And they don't take equity; they just kind of surround you with support. And then I was also part of a group with Northwestern where they had kind of a founder support group through one of the investments that we had gotten at Northwestern through the garage. And then I've also had kind of from there, you find a few people that you really just kind of are aligned with or are thinking through similar questions together with. And so started to create WhatsApp groups. And so now I'm on a number of channels where
Yeah.
I'm, putting out a question and folks will answer or vice versa. And then there are a couple people that are just my like go to, on a tough day, you're trying to work through a contract, you're trying to figure out a decision, just to have those thinking partners has been so helpful. So I definitely have found just the huge value of it. So it can feel lonely, and there are all kinds of decisions and questions that you have to make choices on, and sometimes they're huge ramifications on them. And so it's been helpful for me to lean on this founder community in different ways.
And is there something that you wish you knew at the beginning of your founding journey that now you know, and other founders kind of starting off can have that piece of insight?
I think for me, it's been one of those learnings of like, you just have to take it step by step, and like one step. And then you can't, even right now, like, Series E sounds so far away, but I know like I'm going to figure out the C and then the Series A, and I'm going to figure out kind of each step by step. Like in some ways, I was talking to a woman, I went to a women's event last night to help support female founders. And one of the women who's actually my neighbor is thinking about building a company. And she was just like, how do you even figure out all these steps? And it was like, it really was Googling, talking to people, and just doing the next step and then the next step and the next step. I think sometimes when you see the whole picture, it's so daunting. But when you're like, we just need to become a C Corp, like, let's just do this next step. Even that is confusing, but we will find a way and we'll figure it out, and then you figure out the next and the next. So
Love it.
I think that's been a big piece of it. And then the second one is just hiring like the team is everything. And so finding the right people to work alongside of is everything. So can't be understated.
Given that last piece, how did you define culture, right? Like
Mm.
without, and you have experience from Brave and other initiatives that you've done, but what were those key instincts that you used to build a great culture?
Yeah, I think we're still figuring it out,
Yeah.
even in a couple of years in. It's been an evolution. It's also been people bringing what they loved in their cultures and other companies to the table. I know for me, even I think often about like what was the culture at Facebook and now Meta, and at EF, the company had been at. There are all these amazing cultural values, and at Disney that I think you can learn from. But in a small group, it's also so important that you feel aligned, and that it's less of a like this is the culture and more of a like what do we want this community culture to be. So yeah, we've been trying to work on kind of what are our guiding values, and that affects how you treat people, how you treat your customers, how you treat each other, how you hire, how people decide to work with you. So it's been fun to continue to evolve on those values. And I am also, from the Brave days, also we had a lot of values that I really loved that we've been able to pull in as well.
I love that. And one thing I've noticed throughout your journey, if you will, is you've had great mentors or great
Mhm.
champions, managers, whether it's Disney, Meta, PhD, and
Mhm.
now. And so I want to know, one, it could be something that you just attract, but if you have advice for how have you, seeked them out and really
Mm.
found these great mentors to keep in your corner and defer to in times of need?
Yeah, someone actually asked this the question the other day, because I do think for some reason I tend to draw people who are like want to, maybe sometimes I think it's almost a con for me that I'm like overly looking for advice from others. Sometimes I'm like, no, Emily, you don't need help. Just make your own, like listen to your own voice, because you can also fall prey to the other side of having so many pieces of feedback around you that you're like, I've lost my voice. I'm just listening to others. So I will say that that's one caveat of my tendency to overly pull in a lot of advice around me. But I have found huge value from having champions and mentors in my corner. It's why, PairUp is structured so much in the way of trying to connect you to the right people and to the right support and connections based on your needs. And I think part of it has been just asking and like reaching out to people and seeing if they'll get a coffee. And probably my days as a kid, again, moving around and being new made me someone who was often, built a comfort or a muscle for just going up to someone and asking if they would be up for connecting. And I do find when you ask for advice, people are more willing to talk to you and wanting to, because people like to share and feel knowledgeable. And so it probably is rooted in some of those instincts as a kid that now have translated into me
Yeah.
pulling in people in my corner. But it does make the road much less lonely and much more, especially in the entrepreneurial path. I found it's what kind of can keep me steady often. And there are a couple of our advisors who like leave these regular voice messages of just like pump up talks and just things that have been such a gift in the highs and lows of the
Yeah.
journey too.
I think what you also do, what it sounds like, is that you also just bring it down to a human to human level. And you kind of remove all of the external, the titles, the badges, and it's the fact that your advisors, voice notes and all of that. I think it just proves that it's very much just let's have a great human relationship, if you
Yeah,
will, and not make it so transactional, which I think
totally.
is so
Yeah.
important. I
Yes.
love that. Okay, so this has been so fun, and I now am excited to ask you the more fun questions, if you will. But what is something that you're obsessed with that others are rarely talking about?
Ooh, I think well, work wise, one of my passions has been around building more human centered AI. Like, how can we really have humans both building AI and kind of thinking about it rather than just people interested in AI? So, this is back to like, we need more, not just women, but like people who care about psychology, anthropology, building these systems right now. So that is like I'm so deeply invested in that, and just like more diverse people building in this space, building technology and building especially with AI, given the route and the future that we have with it. But then my side hobby is that I've recently, this is like not a huge passion in my life, but I've recently picked up DJing, which has been like for
Ooh,
me, like I'm a big believer in like we need to let our minds rest, especially as busy women and like people doing big things. And so you have to let your mind also sometimes just be somewhere else and let it pause. And I'm such a like kind of thinking brain, often an executor, that actually like allowing my creative side to come out has been helpful to the work. So that's been something I've been
that
thinking about
is
more on the
so
personal
cool.
side.
It's so funny because my natural instinct to how to quiet your mind doesn't go to DJing,
It's
But and I'm curious actually off of that, Emily, do you meditate? Do you do those type of the more traditional
yeah,
quieting your mind? And has that
that's one
helped?
more noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Well, I would say kind of exercise has been a like huge source of calm for me, and like finding, especially in community or finding other groups and people to work with in yoga. I try and meditate. I feel like I'm not great at it, but I'm trying to build in more of a practice of it. I think it would help me a lot if I did it more often, especially with the kind of quieting the mind work. But yeah, I would say faith and movement have been like probably what have kept me going, and a couple
Yeah.
years into this journey have been really what have kept me steady.
I love that. I love that. And
Yeah.
DJing, which is
DJ for
incredible.
me too.
I love
Yeah.
that. Okay, if you had the power to assign a book for everyone to read and truly understand, what book would you choose?
So one of my favorite books of all time is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Have you read it?
Such a good book. Yes, I've read it. It's
Oh,
incredible. Oh my
yeah,
God.
that was
It's so
one.
heavy, but wow. That's a
Yes.
great one.
Yeah, and I read it in college and just like found it in some place that we're staying in, like underlined print and like rewrote on notes, like so much of that book. But there's just so much goodness in there. And I've reread it in different seasons and kind of find different learnings from it each time. So I
Wow.
would say that
That's
one.
a great one. And that I agree. I think I need to reread it, at a
Yeah,
different time in my life now. So
yeah,
that's great.
exactly. Yeah.
My last one is what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
I think I'm honing bravery. Like I'm trying to hone, like, how do I turn off that part of my mind that's like, this is something that I'm not capable of, and go for it anyway. And, it was why we had called Brave initiatives back in the day, Brave camps. And it's still the fun story of that has been, it's like continued to manifest now to teach women in prisons and folks in refugee camps in different areas. But I feel like I get to witness bravery through these people that we've gotten to work with. And it's just a part of me that, like, there's always going to be a little voice in me that's like, maybe not, like, don't try it. Maybe it might not work, or, might really fall flat. And I think just honing into that brave part of me more
Yeah.
regularly. So,
Well, what I can say just from this chat alone is there's so much bravery within your story, whether it's even going to work at Disney, choosing to go do a PhD program, which is like the most research heavy, intense, and then obviously, founding your own company, which is probably the most brave thing that people can do in many, many ways. So, Emily, I just want to say that, and it's been such a pleasure having you on She Leads. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
thank you so much for having me and for elevating women's voices like this. I really appreciate it. It was so fun.